Hey everyone, it's Andy here, and in this video I want to show you how to practice blending. So this is a Trojan horse, as really all I want to do is advertise you my products with our new paints, mini colour, but no, really I want to kind of show off what these paints do really well, which is get super smooth results and they blend together really easily. But at the same time, I want to actually give you something that you can practice and take away. And I think blending is one of those things that people struggle with to get. And yeah, if I can give any tips on how to practice this method, then I hope it helps as well. If I happen to persuade you to buy some of our paints, then, well, so be it. I remember when I couldn't paint things smooth and I was practicing and trying to work out how do you blend, and I also remember kind of the exact moment when I thought, hey, I've actually done it. I've blended something smoothly, and from there I knew kind of how to do it. It clicked and came together, and I just needed to practice, and I knew I needed to put the time in. Now, you don't have to paint everything smooth on your miniatures. Of course, texture and other things look great, but there's going to be times where you want to do a nice blended transition, and yeah, hopefully this helps you with that. I think swords are one of the best things to practice this on because they are just a straight line. Other shapes are more complex, so if you do want to actively practice this and get better at blending, I think why not try a bunch of swords. We have a really old video here on YouTube. It's one of the first ones we did on painting a power sword, and I still think it's, a great video to watch, even though it's a little bit old. But I just wanted to kind of redo that video, and I wanted to try it with the mini color paints because I do believe that these paints are going to offer me an even smoother finish than what I've done before. Let's talk about primers first, because I've gone for a grey primer, and it's not very often that I'll use black, and I prefer to use a light primer because then, if I want some bold, bright colours, it's going to take fewer layers to get there, and that is going to probably result in a better finish. And any areas that I want to be dark on a figure, well, I could just paint them black anyway if I really wanted to. Most of the time, I spray the model black, and I spray with the airbrush some white, and that really helps to get the paint to stick and, lighten the areas that I need to be light. But if you don't have an airbrush, I really recommend grey. I absolutely love the Mr. Hobby grey primer. It's incredible. But also Grey Seer from Citadel is really good as well. But yeah, I really like those primers. So the first thing is the dilution, and I'm always quite cautious, especially with paints I don't know yet on the dilution. And I would say that if your first layer is too diluted, that's going to stop you from making any mistakes. So you can see here I've taken our teal paint, and I'm going to mix two dilutions here. So one on the right has a lot of water, and then one in the middle has a little bit of water. So what I'll do is I'll try out on the model the paint that is too diluted first of all, and it might be just right. Or if I want it to be thicker, then I can just add some more paint in. But I do like my first brush stroke to be, a little bit cautious and too thin, if anything. Now you'll notice that it's kind of beading here and it's not sticking. And this is because the Tamiya primer is so smooth. I use the Mr. Hobby primer because it's, really smooth, but it does stop things from sticking. I'll just show you quickly the same dilution on a Space Marine that's been primed black and white, and you can see I don't get any beading at all. So yeah, the beading will happen when the paint's heavily diluted, and having black and white like this, as I said, it does make it grip. But all you need to do if you do get the beading is you just need to do a second layer, and it's going to be absolutely fine. But this is one of the reasons why I do like the black and white, is this grippiness. Now, the beading isn't really an issue because we just need to layer it up. And the result, or the benefit from this, is you will get a really smooth end result. It's just because that primer is so smooth. And if you try Grey Seer or this Mr. Hobby, you'll see what I mean in real life. It's just a really nice smooth surface. But second coat, and I'll probably need to do 3 coats for the base coat, and it'll be absolutely perfect. I'm going to use our turquoise to highlight, and it's quite a big jump between teal and the turquoise, so I do a mix here. This isn't necessary because you can always, make a mix when you do the blending later, but maybe it's worth trying a mix out to just see how it goes on the first layer. Now, the most important thing when it comes to blending for me is the direction of your brush stroke. So if we want the highlight to be here in the top, then we need our brush to always be moving towards that. And then we're depositing the most amount of pigment at the point we want to be brighter, lighter, just, where we want to be. So I'm going to move the brush upwards towards the tip here. And then another really important thing is you leave the paint alone. Now there's quite a decent drying time on this paint, so it does take a while. When you're working on multiple details, you can work around different parts of the model, or you can use a hairdryer if you really want to stack up some layers quickly. But this does mean, less likely to build up lumps and bumps if you're doing nice smooth brush strokes. So here I do a second layer, and you can see I'm just building it up. I'm starting from more or less the same point, but most importantly, I just continue to move my brush in that same direction towards where I want the light. Now I skip to the pure turquoise, and I probably didn't need to do the mix, but just like with the dilution, it's quite good to be cautious sometimes and just gradually build it up. But I've diluted this with a decent amount of water, so there's a kind of translucent bit where I first put the brush stroke on, and then as I build it up with more layers, it will become more opaque where I need it to be. As you start a new brushstroke or a layer, you can gradually move it up, but what I found was my highlight ended up being a little bit too small, and I had to, when it was dry, build it up again and start my brushstroke further away. So this is fine. You need to really try and guess the size of the highlight as best you can in the beginning, and just adjust it if you need to. Now I'm going to create a glaze by taking my previous mixes and just adding more water to them so they're more translucent. This time it's really important you don't have a lot of paint on the brush. If when you do this you get tide marks, it's because you have too much paint in the brush or you're putting too much paint down, and that paint can kind of, pool everywhere, and that's where you get these little tide marks. This time your brushstroke direction is going to be going the opposite way. So because we've got this dark color, we want to go towards the dark part. And this is really the key for me to the blending. Your highlight goes one way with the brushstroke, then you take that dark color, you're going over the top of it, but your brushstroke goes in the other direction. And stacking these layers, that is what is going to get a really nice smooth blend in the end. Once again, I start really diluted, and I'm probably too diluted here. I still take my time to build up a couple layers to see if I can get the blend done, but if nothing's happening, then I can thicken that paint up and just gradually try to erase these lines. When you're doing this, try to find the part where it doesn't look good, the line where the gradient is obvious, and start your brushstroke above this line. And then you're just going over and over it again, kind of like a magic eraser, just trying to get rid of those lines. And this can take some practice, and it takes a little while. You need to be patient with it. Sometimes it could take 5, 6, 7, 8 passes or something like that, but ultimately it's worth it to get those seamless blends. And this is why I say this video, it's kind of like an exercise, and if you want to practice this, it's just really nice to focus on one transition, just a straight line like this sword, and just really get your technique dialed in. You can, of course, do this on a project that you intend to finish, but it's quite nice sometimes just to get some spare swords and just really practice to see if you can nail this technique. I'm reasonably happy with my transition so far. It could be smoother, I could be more meticulous, but I think for the purpose of this video, that will do. So what I want to do now is show you how to enhance this and take the highlights further, and this is down to taste. If you feel comfortable doing this first part, then this is kind of like a harder step or just the next step to take. Now we've come up with a set of highlights. I'm really proud of these. They're so nice to use. And there's a few options here what we do next. So we have a very pale blue, which is the obvious one to use. We also have warm light, which is basically an off-white with a little bit of warmth. And then we have something that's, very yellow, which can be used for sunlight and things like that. If you don't know what highlight color you want to use, then it's best to grab your previous color. In this case, it's my turquoise. And what I'll do is I'll just mix all three of these highlight colors so I can make a decision which tone I like the best. The yellow is really nice. It makes a very green kind of color, and this is going to stand out the most. It's going to be the most saturated color. I don't think it's quite what I want for this sword. The warm light seems kind of uninteresting in comparison, but it probably feels about right for me. And the pale blue, yeah, it's probably the one I like the least, actually. I kind of like what the yellowness of the other two adds to the blue. So it just slightly changes the tone a little bit. And then our highlights, I think, might be more interesting. I'm going to go for the warm light, the one in the middle, but I do really like the greenness that you get from the yellow. So I'll just repeat the first step when we added the highlights, but this time I'm just going to do a smaller area. And the cool thing about this method is you can really compartmentalize the stages. So if you get the blending from the mid-tone into the shadow, which is the turquoise into the teal, you can kind of leave that now and then just focus on the turquoise part and just start to add in this highlight in the center here. It's important you get the width correct so that it looks cool, and you also give yourself a little bit of space to do the blending. And all I need to do is just repeat the steps that I did with the first transition. So what I've done is a highlight here of turquoise and warm light. So I go back to the turquoise on its own, and my brush stroke goes away from the light. Just repeating, going over those lines until I blend it. If you can't get the blend to work, sometimes you need to make some new mixes. Maybe you need to create a new tone in between to really get it dialed in. And there's always going to be a little bit of back and forth, going back to the highlight color, back to the shadow color, or whatever. But eventually, with some practice, you'll really get to know how to make this work. The aim is to get the gradient in as few steps as possible, and that will result in a really nice, flat, smooth finish, so the paint physically looks nice on the miniature. But that is what I think Mini Color is really great at. I've done this kind of power sword or this look loads of times, and I find when I add colors that have a lot of white in and I do these pale highlights, it can get really chalky and chunky and lumpy and bumpy very quickly. But I'm really happy with how the warm light works because I've got a little bit more leeway to get it smooth. The coverage isn't as good, but I think for blending, that's better. So if you want this super blended look, I really am proud of how these paints work. And I know I would say that because this is basically an advert for them, but I hope you can see that this product really is great for that. This has just one point of light, so it's not very interesting, and you can go ahead and add any number of additional highlights that you want. They don't all necessarily need to be this bright, but I can do, the first couple steps and just kind of add some extra highlights where I think it's going to make the sword look better, rather than having it really plain and maybe uninteresting in this later part. But you don't need to, make them all bright. It's quite nice to have one area which is drawing your attention, and then just some other little highlights around it to make it interesting. As you get confident with this technique, then you can add complexity by adding different colors and tones and things like this. And if you can do it with a color like this blue, it's really nice to, build up and start doing things like non-metallic metal. This is a really nice way to practice before you try things like metallic metal out. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. I really hope if blending is something that you maybe struggle with or want to get better at, this is something you can really just sit and practice. Let's grab a thumbnail here. Small brushes aren't cool, are they? So yeah, let me get a big brush so I look cooler. Yeah, that's going to be better for the thumbnail. Then people think I'm a proper artist now. I would say it would take an hour to do a sword really well. You know, you need to take your time. Don't rush this. But when you get the technique down, it is reasonably quick. I think that the results are absolutely worth it. It is always satisfying to get those really nice bright blues with those perfect blends and the smooth finish. It's just satisfying, no matter what you say. I think it always looks good on minis. So yeah, if you like what you see with the paints, then please check them out. But for these techniques, they really are great at. This is kind of my main technique for blending, and so when it came to making the paints, it is what I focused on, trying to make them easy for you guys to get these nice smooth blends. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. Leave your comments, leave your questions, and it's really cool to be bringing out our own paints finally and doing little videos like this with some tips in that I hope are useful. And yeah, I will see you in the next one.